So my name is Scott Kratz. I now live in Washington, D.C., but for 19 years I was an Angelino. Used to live in Atwater. Used to take my dog on walks on the LA River sort of every single day. So the river and Los Angeles, they are extraordinarily close to me. And with that, I see the river has so much potential, right? So much potential to connect 51 miles up and down from the valley all the way down to Long Beach. Stitch together communities that otherwise might be disconnected, right? Can bring together people who otherwise wouldn't normally cross paths. But what I'm here to talk about today is I would posit, and I think there'll be a lot of agreement in the room, to do that the most effectively, it's critical that it is the community that's driving this effort, right? It's community that's helping to set and own that vision. It's going to be a much more successful one. And two, to think more broadly beyond the confines sort of the river itself, and to think about how do we invest in this, yes, bricks and mortar infrastructure, but how do we also invest in the neighborhoods and the communities and the people, right? To make sure that the residents who are there can stay and thrive in place. And that's been sort of a key part of the Bridge Park that I'll talk about in just a minute. But before I dive in, just can I ask for just a quick sort of show of hands? It's always helpful to know who I'm talking to, right? So people in government who work for municipality, few nonprofits. Awesome. And you can raise your hand more than once because we all wear a lot of hats. The community members or civic organizations, arts organizations. Awesome. Academia or research groups. Did I miss anybody? Did anybody not put their hand up? Who did I miss? Did that cover everybody? Wow, okay, great. So what I'm going to do today is go through a quick overview of the park. This is a park that I'm working on with a nonprofit, the appropriately named Building Bridges Across the River. We're a nonprofit that's based in Southeast DC. And we're partnering with the city, we're partnering with the District Department of Transportation, DDOT, to transform an old, aged-out freeway into a new park that connects over the Anacostia River. So as I go through this, sort of the two main themes that I'm going to touch on. One is that community engagement, because that's been the DNA of the project from the beginning, and you're going to sort of hear that again and again. And then I'm going to do a deeper dive into the an effort that we call, it's kind of a mouthful, but the Equitable Development Plan. So this is our larger effort to make sure that we are investing in a broader neighborhood to get ahead of issues of displacement, gentrification, that I know are just as keen as Los Angeles as they are in Washington, D.C. As I go through and then at the end, I'm going to show, for I think one of the first times, we just came out with a series of these short videos about the steps that we followed to create our Equitable Development Plan, and we hope this is helpful. Because the strategies might be different in DC than LA or Seattle or San Francisco, but I think the process can be very similar. And as I go through this, I'm going to go through some of this information fairly quickly. So if something isn't clear you have questions about something or want to do a deeper dive, please feel free to interrupt me. I also just got off a plane today and my ears haven't popped, so it feels like there's a towel that's like duct taped to my head right now, so my volume is a little like up and down. So if I'm screaming or you can't hear me, help me modulate my volume. That would be great. Another little participatory piece. So as we go through, I want to take a quick step back before I do a deeper dive into the park. Increasingly, right, cities are looking at how to create these new civic spaces, these spaces that can bring together people, right? And increasingly, cities are looking at how to transform old, aged-out infrastructure into these new said parks and civic spaces. Probably the best example is the Highline in New York, right? The 2.7 mile old freight train that's turned into an elevated park. It's an incredible success, real challenges along increased property values. But they had 8 million visitors last year come to the Highline. Similar project, the 606 in Chicago, old elevated train track. A project in Detroit called the DeQuindry Cut, where they've actually taken a sunken railroad and connected the neighborhoods of Detroit with the Detroit River. and a park in Dallas called Clyde Warren Park, where they actually decked over an active freeway and made a 3-4 acre park. But the larger point of this is that this is happening around the country, right? We're actually part of a larger project, a larger group called the Highline Network that's 19 transformed infrastructure into parks projects around the country. You can find out more about them by going to highlinenetwork.org. We meet on a regular basis and learn from each other, and everything from the nuts and bolts about how to build these parks and design these parks and work with the community, but increasingly it's about this larger, through the larger filter of equity. So, and as we're going through this work, it's interesting to see the number of bridges that have been transformed into from automotive ways or railroad tracks into pedestrian walkways. I've become a total bridge geek instead of working on this project. But I think what's interesting about sort of all of these, whether it's Chattanooga or Nashville or my favorite named bridge, the Purple People Mover Bridge in Cleveland, Cincinnati, that actually connects 2 different states over the Ohio River, is that they connect not only 2 different otherwise disconnected communities, but they connect people to the river, right? Just like in Los Angeles, one of the many reasons why we were founded as the nation's capital is we sit at the confluence of the Potomac and the eastern branch of the Potomac, now known as the Anacostia River. And yet, up until recently, we haven't really defined ourselves as a river city. I think what's starting to change, right? We're starting to, our backs have been to the river for a long time. We're starting to embrace it. But to get people to really care about the river, you need to bring them down to it. And that's a key goal of the park. So in our case, for those that know DC, Capitol Building's up here. We're about a mile and a half away. The Nationals baseball park, it's about 7, 8, 9 years old. Booming area of the Navy Yard. This river, the Anacostia River, has long divided Washington, D.C. So the neighborhood of Capitol Hill and Navy Yard and Anacostia and Fair Lawn could not be more different. Based on race, based on household income, the poverty levels, crime rates, health outcomes. So the idea of creating a physical and metaphorical bridge that can help stitch together the city is something that the community has become really enthusiastic about. From a mechanic standpoint, and I won't dwell on this too long, but these are the 2 old spans of the bridge, the light gray and the orange span at the top and the bottom. Old bridges built in the 1960s that came to the end of their lifespan. We are repurposing the old downstream span, the orange span on the bottom, to this new park that will no longer hold cars or tractor trailers, but that will hold community-generated programming ideas. So in our case, we had to get rid of the deck. We saved the old piers. That's one of the most expensive parts about building any river bridge. Save the old piers, and then building a new deck on top of the piers. And this is sort of the outline of where the park will be, that yellow outline. From the beginning, it's been really clear that we've had very clear goals with the community, and these have been our goals from the beginning, the sort of 4 table legs that the entire project stands on. Reconnecting communities, as I said, is probably the goal that most viscerally connects with local residents. Improving public health by providing a safe place to play, re-engaging residents with the river, and then this goal that I'll talk about a little bit deeper, of being not only an anchor for economic development. I think that's the way cities used to look at economic development, but how do we be an anchor for equitable and inclusive growth? So for us, before we engaged any architects, landscape architects, engineers, we went to the community and said, what do you think? Is this a dumb idea? Is it a good idea? I live near the park, so I live about 4 blocks away. My wife and I are at 9th and I Southeast, so this is my neighborhood as well. But I think particularly for communities where there is an enormous amount of distrust, there's a huge trust deficit and a justifiable one, because people, frankly, that look just like me have come in again and again and made a lot of promises that for a variety of reasons have not been fulfilled. It was really important to not come in with a final rendering and say, what color should the chairs be, right? But take several steps back and in essence sort of ask for permission. Is this something that the community even wants? So we spent 2 years, over 200 meetings, meeting with faith leaders, community organizers, business owners, council members, you name it. And when we realized that there was some enthusiasm, some skepticism to be sure, but we said, all right, well then help us design it. Help us make sure that every single programming element that's on the park came from the community. So these are the programming ideas. And then we started thinking about, well, how do we take these community-generated programming ideas and turn it into a design competition. And many design competitions, the designers don't speak to the client, more or less the community, and that didn't make any sense to us. So we created a stakeholder group that reviewed the design brief before a single design team saw it. They met with the 4 final design teams again and again, and at the end of a 9-month process, they selected the design team. So I think a lot of this work is about doing the really important but hard work of giving up power, putting power back into the community. So I didn't get a vote, right? The community voted. It was a little point of anxiety because I knew I'd have to raise a lot of money for this. But often I think we forget that the answers are in the community, right? I think that's sort of a critical takeaway. So the community, as it turns out, and our jury was unanimous for the design by OMA and Olin. I'm going to quickly go through the design, but it's sort of 2 trusses that come together, meet in the middle, and make way. It has the sort of idea of this crossing, right? These 2 communities coming together. That in turn was inspired by the original Pierre L'Enfant and Benjamin Banneker designs for Washington, D.C. And I think this is interesting because we have a lot of federal icons in D.C., but not a lot of icons for the 750,000 residents who live in the district or the 5 million residents who live in the DMV. So recognizing that this is an ambitious slide, sort of, I'll just let it sit there for a second. I'm not comparing ourselves to the Lincoln Memorial or the Washington Memorial or the White House, but why not, right? I mean, we should have icons that we, the people, own, right? And certainly for the district. So it makes way for spaces, a sort of aerial view, active and passive spaces. All these are on our website, so I'm going to go through these quickly. But the performance space, it's jumping around. Performance space, play space, Hammock Grove, the place for not only physical well-being but mental health. There's an enormous amount of toxic stress in our communities. Public art that tells the rich history of the region. Frederick Douglass used to walk across this bridge every single day on his way to work. How do we make sure we elevate this and elevate the histories and celebrate the important histories of the neighborhood? Urban agriculture. Our community has 1 grocery store serving 85,000 residents. It's an enormous social and health justice issue. Cafe and restaurant, an environmental education center, and it gets you up high enough to see over the Navy Yard where you can see the Washington Monument and the Capitol building. So imagine being here on the 4th of July, right? It's going to be really amazing. So where we are right now, we spent the last 5-6 years engaging with the community. We should be at 100% design in 2021 and then open in 2023. But what's really critical is that we're continuously trying to create this feedback loop with the community of making sure that we're testing and piloting programming before the park even opens. So our biggest event that we do by far, and I'll invite you all if you're in Washington, D.C. on April 5th, 2020, come to D.C. We're having our 6th annual Anacostia River Festival. It's a huge event, about 10,000 people come down to the banks of the river. And for a single afternoon, you can sort of imagine what the park can be. This is by far the biggest event that we do. It's the official closing program of the National Cherry Blossom Festival. We partner with the National Park Service and over 40 local nonprofits because it's important that we're tapping into the amazing nonprofits that are already there. We started 7 urban farms in Southeast DC. Those little yellow dots are sort of where all our farms are. We heard all these programming ideas that we baked into the design competition, but we heard a much deeper need. We heard a need for jobs. We heard a need for housing. We heard a need for small businesses. We heard a need for protecting the stories and voices that are already in the neighborhood, the cultural equity strategies, if you will. So we started thinking, well, how do we do this? We pulled together senior scholars and senior researchers from the Urban Institute, from LISC DC, Local Initiative Support Corporation, the Office of Planning and DC Fiscal Policy Institute, a local think tank, to look at who lives and works in a 1-mile watershed around the park. So this is the park, it's going to be right in the middle, right? So it's a 1-mile watershed. These are sort of census tracts that you see. And it was really important that the very first thing that we did was define this sort of geographic area, right? Because these are huge issues that DC is struggling with, just like LA is struggling with. We have 40,000 people on the affordable housing wait list in DC, right? I mean, that's a number that's so big you just want to curl up in the fetal position and be like, what do I do? How can I impact this? But if you have a 1 mile radius on the around sort of an LA River node or the 11th Street Bridge Park, it gives you an opportunity to test and pilot some of these ideas and some of these strategies. And if we're successful, that's great. And if not, then we can learn and course correct. But it's also really important to understand who lives there, who lives and works there. So we spent several months just collecting existing data from the census, from the survey, from ACS data, of everything from housing prices to poverty levels to household income, to race. Because if we were making strategies to make sure that local residents could stay and thrive in place, it was important that we started with solid data. And then we did what we've done from the beginning. We went back to the community. So we spent a year working with faith leaders and government officials and small business owners, and we did a large asset map of nonprofits who were already active in the community, right? Groups like MANA that does affordable housing, and Mikasa and Washington Area Community Investment Fund. Because often there's amazing work that's happening in the community, but it's not necessarily connected, right? They happen in sort of existing silos because there's not enough time or resources, right? People are doing amazing work, but it takes time to lift your head up and see what somebody else is doing and how you can connect. At the end of this year-long process, we came up with our Equitable Development Plan. You can go to our website at bridgepark.org/equity, and you can download this. I'm not going to go through all 34 strategies, but I want to just name a few. Because you might say, well, that's great, Scott, but how do you do that? How do you make sure that the residents can stay and thrive in place? In our housing area, it was really important that we built in some early wins. This is really critical because one of the strategies that the community really asked for, and we're in the process of standing up right now, is a community land trust, which is great. We just acquired our first community land trust property 2 months ago, 65-unit apartment building. Super excited about it. But it's taken 2 or 3 years to stand up a separate 501c3 that is controlled by the local residents. So, and we knew that, so it was really important to start some of the strategies. Within a month of coming out with the Equitable Development Plan strategies, we kicked off a Ward 8 Homebuyers Club. So this is something that a local nonprofit named MANA has been doing for decades, just never east of the river. And to date, they've seen over 500 participants and 73 Ward 8 renters and now homeowners who've gone through the program, right? Capturing generational wealth. 75% of the residents east of the river are renters at greatest risk of displacement. So we've been partnering with another nonprofit called Housing Counseling Services to lead tenant rights workshops, targeting the smaller apartment buildings that tend to sort of fall through the cracks, the sort of 6 to 20, 4 to 20 unit apartment buildings. And they've been doing the hard work of going door to door to organize tenant associations at each one of these sites. It's a lot of hard work. They've gone to every single one of those apartment buildings multiple times over the last 3 years, but proving great success. When we started this work, we thought it was mainly going to be, at least I thought, it was mainly going to be a series of housing strategies, because that's the sort of canary in the coal mine, right? But it became very clear that if we don't have access to wealth creation, if we don't have access to jobs, then having access to safe and secure housing is going to be that much more difficult. So we have been partnering with the Washington Area Community Investment Fund to invest over $1 million in small businesses, where the Bridge Park comes in. How that manifests itself is through low-cost loans as well as technical assistance. If we're spending millions of dollars to build this park, how do we make sure as much of those dollars go back into the local community as possible? But to do that, we need to make sure that local residents have the skill set and capacity they need to apply for and succeed at these jobs, right? So even though we're 2 years away from opening the park, we just wrapped up our 5th construction training program that's graduated well over 100 residents. So that when the contractors come to us after, as we're starting construction, and say, well, I can't find anybody local to work on this job, we can say, actually, we have a list of 200 people that you can talk to. And we just added a series of cultural equity strategies to our newest plan that aims to sort of lift up and amplify the voices of residents that are there. Because we can get the housing right and the workforce right, but if we lose the soul of a neighborhood, that has enormous downstream consequences. The last 2 things I'll touch on that aren't actually in the plan, because the plan is always meant to be an organic document, is that one of the things we've become a little obsessed about is how do we build a stronger muscle that's in the community. So we started last summer piloting this program that we call a Community Leadership Empowerment Workshop. It's It's run by a gentleman named Bob Hoffman, who's been doing this since the Carter administration. He's amazing, one of the wisest people I know. He's 76, 78 years old. And it's part sort of how to run a meeting, how to de-escalate conflict, how to build consensus, how to demystify the planning process, right? Because if you miss that random Tuesday meeting at 6:30 p.m. because you've, I don't know, have a life and you have kids and you might be working multiple jobs and you lose that opportunity to vote on that PUD, you're sort of out of luck. So we had the head of Georgetown University's planning school come in and give a planning 101 to help understand particularly where the community could leverage those sort of points of power. We're now on the second Community Leadership Empowerment Workshop, and we just did a train their trainer program. So Bob is now training East of the River residents to then take over for Bob in the third cohort and be paid to lead this. So it's sort of teaching folks that then can amplify this geometrically. And then finally, something that really struck me is that the East of the River residents have the highest percentage of unbanked and underbanked residents in the district. And that also has enormous downstream consequences. Car title loans, payday loan, check cashing places, right? All that predatory lending crap. So we're piloting this program that we just kicked off in March that's a matched children's savings account. It's a 5-to-1 match. Family puts in $1, we'll match it with $5 up to $1,800 that then matriculates into a 529 college savings account. And what comes with that is financial the literacy programming, free tax preparation. And you might say, well, what does children's savings account, what on earth does that have to do with building a park, right? Like nothing but everything, right? Because it's really critical that we're strengthening. By the time the park opens, we'll be implementing these equitable development strategies for 7 years, right? Before a single person walks across that bridge. And it's critical that we're thinking about this work early, intentionally, and with the community. So lastly, jumping ahead, from the beginning, we've been working with LISC DC, and LISC DC came to us and said, after we came out with the strategies, they want to help implement these strategies. And we said, awesome, that's great. What does that look like? And about 3 years ago, it was our honor to stand on stage with them as they made a $50 million investment in the 1 mile area around the park. They're up to almost $50 million. They're at $45 million. We've raised an additional $7 million. So we've raised about the same amount of money to invest directly in the community as we're building the park, right? And that's a very different way of thinking about building infrastructure. So a bunch of lessons. Thinking about this early is really important, right? Because once neighborhoods start to move, it moves so much faster than we could possibly respond to it. We need to be intentional about our work, keep the community at the center at every step. Making sure that we know when to shut up, right? And we know when to listen is really critical. The understanding, learning from who has gone before. So if we can be of any help, please let us know. We looked at the Atlanta Beltline's Equitable Development Plan and modeled much of this work on that, so we can share these ideas. The making sure that data is informing sort of every step. I mentioned our early wins. Measurement's critical, right? So it's one thing to have a plan, it's another thing to have a third party be looking and setting at clear, measurable goals. So in our case, we've been working from the beginning with the Urban Institute, who've not only been documenting this work, but they've been making sure there's a real-time feedback loop to what are we getting right and what are we getting wrong. The working with the city has been critical. This work does not happen in a vacuum. So at every step of the way, we were working with our local city agencies in DC, telling us, what are you doing? Because we do not want to be duplicative. How do we be value add? And then how do we build these partnerships? Because we should not be doing this work all by ourselves. This is just a short list of all the different communities all the different nonprofits that we're collaborating with, right? So the money isn't necessarily coming to us, it's going to all of these groups who are already doing this work in the community. And I think that's what you have the potential to do right here in LA, right? So for more information, you can go to bbardc.org or bridgeport.org, either one, Equity Tools. I'm going to end with this little short video that recaps some of these main points, but we've been getting all of these questions from around the country about, usually the questions go something like this: tell me the 3 things I need to do to stop gentrification. which is great that they found us. I would humbly suggest that that's a more appropriate question might be, tell me the steps that I can follow to work with my community to make sure that we're putting the community at the center of our process, right? So we boiled down like a 7-step process that we've followed to create strategies that work for us that is now currently being implemented in Minneapolis, in Durham, in St. Louis, in Dallas, and in San Francisco is about to build a big park, and they just hired their first Equitable development manager to implement a strategy like this. So this process is the thing that can be replicated.
So, you'd like to improve equity in your community. Awesome. Here are the 7 steps we found to be critical to making a difference in our community. Step 1, engage your community.
The importance of that is being able to hear from a range of residents, because you'll hear a range of different needs.
Your project isn't happening in a vacuum. Every place has its own culture and history, which should inform your process.
So what generally happens in east of the river is people come and collect information from us, and then they go off and do their thing. But the Bridge Park took a very, very different approach, and it's more like the collective.
I think the first step is listening.
To have residents at the table from the very beginning of your process, and also to engage them not only in building your plan, but helping you implement it.
While engaging the community is critical at all stages, you can go a long way in building trust in this first step. Step 2, establish geographic scope and collect data.
We really wanted to make sure that the residents that were here were going to benefit from the 11th Street Bridge Park the most.
In order to work intentionally, you need to figure out exactly where you will have an impact and ground your understanding of what is going on there through research.
So that 1-mile walk shed that we sort of decided around the future Bridge Park is anyone who can walk to the park in 20 minutes. And those are going to be the people most impacted on a daily basis by the creation of the park there.
To get a clear sense of who your project will affect, you'll want to learn about the community's demographics. For the Bridge Park, this meant things like home values, racial demographics, and rates of home ownership. You'll also want to clarify who is already doing good work in your community to understand who your programming partners could be. Who are the civic associations, businesses, local leaders, and municipal officials relevant to your efforts in your community? Step 3, engage stakeholders. Remember those partners you identified in Step 2? They are the key to the success of your project.
So one of the early steps of our Equitable Development Plan was determining what resources were already in the community that we were focused on. It really helped us to determine who needed to be at the table.
Your Equitable Development Plan needs to be based on your community's needs and priorities.
When we first started developing the Equitable Development Plan, we thought it was just going to be an affordable housing issue. But as soon as we started talking with residents, there were issues of workforce, there were issues of small business growth in the neighborhood, and the retention of Black-owned businesses in the neighborhood. And we said, this is not a one-issue problem.
Use multiple means to engage people. This may mean handing out flyers or visiting door to door. Make it possible for people to attend your meetings by picking times that people can realistically attend. Consider providing childcare, food, and stipends for focus groups, depending on who's participating. Write your plan to highlight and elevate the ideas of the people who already live there. Step 4, share your Equitable Development Plan. Do whatever you have to get this into the hands of your community and your partners. That may mean having it available in print and online. It may mean having easy-to-digest summaries available. And remember, this is not the last step. Step 5, begin implementation.
This was not a plan that was going to just sit somewhere, that it was actually something that we really wanted to put at the forefront of our work first.
Some parts of your plan may take time to bear fruit, but in order to continue building trust and momentum, be sure to include some ideas that can lead to early wins.
So Ward 8 Home Buyers Club was something that we started right away. We went to Manna and we said, look, we want to have a home buyers club here in Ward 8 for Ward 8 residents to ensure that they have access to this type of learning and that we can move people into homes if they're ready for them.
Step 6. Continually evaluate your impact. Your equitable development plan should be able to grow and adapt. Develop a process for collecting data, setting clear goals, measuring impact, and refining your strategies. You may consider partnering with a local university or research institution to help with this. Continue to attend meetings, engage your community, and collect feedback, and be open to making changes.
One thing, that we didn't initially think about, but it became really clear as Bridge Park was actually implementing community programming, was the important role of arts and culture.
We're creating this space that will sort of be emblematic of these local communities and these residents. And to build ownership, we wanted to ensure that sort of culture was put at the same level as the economic pieces. So we had already been doing programming, which kept the community engaged in also a different way.
Step 7. Celebrate early wins to build confidence in your plan. Community engagement never stops. Trust is something that needs to be carefully nourished, watered, and fed.
And this is how development should take place. We should get to know who you are. You should get to know who we are. This is what community development looks like. We've seen economic development in this city. We have not seen community development. And that is the key difference between what the Bridge Park is bringing to the table and what we've seen done prior to.
That's it. These 7 steps are not easy, but they will help you develop and execute an equitable development plan that creates real and lasting positive change in your community.
This plus another video that we use as a policy sort of advocacy piece about what is equitable development are up on our website, bridgepark.org/equity tools. We're going to be posting next week, I think it's next week, a series of all of our frequently asked questions will be up there too. And all of these they are also available with Spanish subtitles. So if you're interested in any of those, download them. If you have any problems, just reach out to me. So that was a ton of information to throw at everybody on like a Wednesday afternoon. I think we're Wednesday, right? It's been a crazy week. But happy to take sort of questions, thoughts, ideas, comments before we start breaking up into smaller groups. Yeah.
The implementation is still going on, but I'm wondering what results you've seen so far.
Yeah, thank you. So the question was what results have we seen so far? It's really critical to make sure this is where measurement comes in, that we're documenting this work. And so just recently, we have added into our website a full where are we now in the equitable development work. How many people have gone through the Home Buyers Club? How many people have been employed through our construction training program? How many people have gone through the tenant rights workshops? And it's bridgepark.org/community impact, I think. It's all under the sort of, if you go to bridgepark.org/equity, everything's in there. But those are infographics that are up there that are updated on a quarterly basis. And as we work with our partners, it's really important as we sort of formalize some of these partnerships, right? Because often we're collectively going after money and going after resources, that we're building this data collection to all of our MOAs, all of our memorandum of agreements, because it's really critical that we're never going to know if we're successful or not if we're not actually collecting this data. So it's important. I will add one other item is that one of the things that we're really excited about that we're starting to work on with the Urban Institute and the McCourt School of Business at Georgetown University is like this work is great, and raising $57 million to date to invest directly in the community is awesome. That's fantastic. it's still not enough, right? So what's the broader need that's in the community? So we're in the process now, and Urban Institute and Georgetown are leading this effort, but we're helping with them to engage with the community and set some larger targets. Because say, for instance, we're crazy successful and we've created 1,000 units of affordable housing within that 1 mile radius, right? Maybe the need is 5,000, right? So how do we understand what that delta is? How do you weaponize that data, which can be an extraordinarily powerful advocacy tool for local residents, right, during the larger budgeting process and sort of policy issues? Urban came to us first and said, help us create this, and we said, no, you need to go to the community. It's the community that needs to set these targets. So I think sometime early next year, they'll be able to release some of those targets after a series of some deep conversations. But again, it's starting to sort of quantify some of that information, and as part of that, we need to make sure that we're showing what we can do, but then what the larger need is in the community. It's kind of a long answer, but it's an important question. So, yeah. Yeah.
How do you quantify the need for funding for the engagement process? Like, what does that look like? Because as someone who is the affordable housing organizer for our department, and I often do a lot of the engagement pieces, and oftentimes our personnel is like, especially with the real estate department, they're like, but where is that money going to come from? And so I think it's a matter that we haven't yet assigned amount of money for that kind of process. And so either how do you quantify that? What have you found has been the most engaging? Because I can imagine that, like, yeah, when you give people either daycare or some food and or a stipend, there'd be all the more incentive for them to come out and be sustained in the process long beyond just like giving the initial information. So what does that look like? What's the importance of maybe quantifying that? And then what is the best way to pitch that to like potential funders or people who don't see the need for that?
So I heard two questions in there. One is like, how do you make sure that there's sustained community engagement, right? And what does that look like from an operational standpoint, financial standpoint? And then two, if I heard you right, and if not, please correct me. What are the long-term? Where has been some success in some long-term funding strategies to help implement this work? Because a plan is only. I mean, some of these things we can implement without much dollars, but most of them require dollars. Is that right?
I think so. I think well.
Did I miss something?
Sometimes we just don't have enough budget for like giving folks a meal at every community meeting, and then folks, we just see that the numbers dwindle just a bit. And so there's people that are going to want to come out because they see the need and they understand, and there's folks that just can't come out because they're working their second job or they're worried about daycare and they don't want to be nuisance.
I mean, we've started putting this in a requirement and building it into all of our grants, right? And increasingly, we're seeing, at least in the foundation world, understand that this is important. We're paying our residents, right? When they participate. I would never ask a consultant to come down from New York and work for free, and yet that's what we ask the community to do all the time, right? And it's super problematic. Their time is just as valuable as a consultant from New York, if not more so. So we built in stipends for everybody. So for instance, our community land trust advisory committees, we're standing up a separate CLT. It was really critical that we were putting the community, the C in the CLT. So we've been meeting on a monthly basis to help drive every decision for the community land trust. What level of AMI we should focus on? Should we prioritize housing versus rental versus homeownership versus commercial properties, whatever, right? But meeting once a month is a huge, that's a lot, right? So we pay them, not a lot of money, but it's a stipend, several $100s, right? We make sure there's food at every table, or food at every sort of meeting that's there. It's not a ton of money at the end of the day. I mean, it's a few $1,000s for this, but just removing those barriers for participation. Otherwise, we know what happens. It's the same people who show up, right? And not that their voice isn't important, but we need to be creative about how we're engaging the community. And increasingly, just to stick on the community land trust as an example, community land trusts are they're not that complicated, but it's something that is sort of unfamiliar to a lot of people. So we've been trying to get really creative about how do we share sort of what is a community land trust, how does it work. So we've been doing everything from having movie screenings to having panel discussions to we did a community cookout last fall, right? We just bought a whole bunch of we did a big fish fry. Bought a bunch of burgers and some hot dogs and some veggie dogs and just said stop on by. And we had members of our Community Land Trust Advisory Committee, 2/3 of which live in the community, right? We've set that bar. So it's their neighbors talking to other neighbors about this. So so we need to get, and we do a lot of door-to-door work, right? We do, and it does get expensive because you need to pay for often staff, but there's nothing that beats, I think, sort of going door to door for somebody who's a resident to talk about sort of these larger issues. Increasingly, I think like 5 years ago, we had funders push back on us and say like, why would you pay somebody in the community? But after having like a deeper conversations with them, I think they start to get it now. And again, it's not a huge part of our overall budget, but it demonstrates that we value sort of the voices that are in the neighborhood. Two is the larger sort of how we fund this. We're finding. I really underestimated the sort of three things. One, the value of having a tight, constricted geographic area to test and pilot some of these things. So, for instance, if the Community Land Trust is successful, it cannot stay within a 1 mile radius of the park. It's going to need to expand across the ward, perhaps across the entire city, right? Actually, our business plan has expanded across the city. But the funders like to see how we can start small and sort of learn. The Children's Savings Account, same thing. We're starting in Ward 8, but we'd like to expand to the entire city if we're successful. So that idea of couching things as demonstrations, pilots, like funders love that stuff, right? Having this larger multi-sector approach has been critical. So we applied 2 years ago for a very competitive grant from JP Chase called the Pro Neighborhoods Work. It was a $5 million grant that we were one of 3 that were selected across the country. That is going directly into our equitable development plan strategies. $3 million for property acquisition for the Community Land Trust, $1 million for small businesses, $500,000 for workforce development, and there's some other sort of smaller strategies. But I think the thing that really got them, the thing that sort of one of the reasons why we were selected is because we were taking this multi-sector approach, right? And I'll give you a very concrete example, and this is where it gets really exciting, I think. This 65-unit apartment building that we just acquired as part of the Community Land Trust, each of those units needs about $100,000 worth of work, right? Because it's been run by a slumlord for a long time. How do we make sure that we're working with some of our small businesses east of the river? We're now working on building the bonding capacity of local construction companies, right? That's a huge barrier to getting jobs, to then be selected to do that construction work at each of those units. And how do we make sure those small construction companies are hiring people that are coming out of Skyland Workforce Development Center, right, that live in Ward 8? So these dollars start to circulate sort of again and again. It's not like a novel idea, but it's an idea that we find is really exciting. And finally, that evaluation piece is absolutely key, right? The funders really want to make sure that there is a sort of robust evaluation that we can learn from. And we've been really candid. We've done some things that have just not worked at all. The children's savings accounts have been really slow to we thought people would just jump at the chance because it's free money, right? But this match 5-to-1, but we've learned 2 things. One, we learned that people were looking at us sort of sideways, like, wait, you're going to give me, what's the catch? And so it's that trust, right? And 2, a lot of the families we're working with, like for them to save college for their kids when they're trying to make the monthly rent, right? They're like, there's a total disconnect, right? So we're trying a whole bunch of strategies, but we've been candid with our funder. In this case, it's Capital One provided a $250,000 grant. It's not going to us, it's going to our partner, but we're working with them on that to sort of retool and sort of rethink that. I will say too, in funding, do not underestimate the 2 things: the number of large foundations that have completely changed in the last 5 years to focus on equity, right? I mean, equity's now such a buzzword. It's a little sort of, what does it mean? But there's a lot of funding from the Kresge's, from the Ford Foundations, from the Surdnos Foundations, from the MacArthur Foundations, who are keenly interested in this work, investing literally billions of dollars. And 2, the larger financial world, right? The financial banks need to invest in the local community where they have a presence through the Community Reinvestment Act. And we've been very successful of attracting dollars to implement the equitable development strategy from Citi Foundation, from JP Chase, from TD Bank, from Citibank, from a number of financial institutions. So, yeah.
What is the range that you pay community members in those stipends?
It ranges. So when we were doing our equitable development cultural equity strategies, we worked with arts and cultural leaders and we asked them to come to, I don't know, it was like 4 or 5 sort of brainstorming sessions, and I think we paid them $1,000, right? So again, it wasn't like a ton of the money, but it was enough, and it certainly made it was that A, valuing their time most importantly, but the B, it was it ensured that we had continuity because there was a really good chance that they were going to be showing up. I mean, it was their participation that was incumbent on the stipend, right? For our Community Land Trust Advisory Committee members, I think we pay them like $500 a year or something, right? And they don't come to every meeting, but so it varies sort of depending on what we have in the budget.
And do you find, like we did a project where we paid people really well, but we found that a lot of folks were coming because they were coming so they can collect money, which is totally understandable. Do you find that tension between I'm here because I'm here to contribute versus I'm here to collect a check, and how do you monitor that?
I guess I'd go back to what's the goal, right? And if their goal is their input, and their input's valuable, and they've been selected for a reason for that. I mean, all of these folks that were participating in the cultural equity strategy, for instance, were arts and cultural leaders that were there, right? So if they're doing it for the money or they really care about the Bridge Park, I don't really care if they're showing up, right? I think that's important. But I think, just yesterday we had, so we have this Train the Trainer program that I mentioned, that everyone, that they're now, the folks who've been trained are now co-teaching the Community Leadership Empowerment Workshop with Bob, and we're paying them $500, right? $500 a session. So it's not nothing, right? I mean, and we had somebody who taught Saturday who came in yesterday, and she needed a check, right? She needed a check yesterday because she needed a check, right? And so we scrambled and got her a check, right? So she's there. We value her. She did an amazing job on Saturday, co-teaching the class, and she also needs the money. So that's great, and we're compensating her for it. Just like just like Bob, our facilitator, we're compensating him as well. So we haven't found that. We haven't I think it's particularly the folks that we've at this point, particularly the folks that are participating in this, we've selected for one reason or another, right? That's not entirely true. The Community Land Trust Advisory Committee, we did a larger sort of call, but nobody's doing that for the money necessarily.
So you're selecting people versus people just showing up.
Yeah, I mean, if someone comes in for an open, we did a big open house to give us feedback on the Equitable Development Plan, and we had food there, and we had childcare there, and we were doing arts programming and everything else. We didn't pay people to come in for that afternoon to just sort of give us their thoughts. But if we're asking for sort of continued support and their continued time, then that warrants it. So, although we have found we're going to be launching, we just got a planning grant to pilot unconditional cash transfer. This is sort of cousin to the universal basic income. I won't get all geeky and sort of go down on the rabbit hole on this, but one of the things we found is that if you're collecting data, right, that our staff just came back from visiting Stockton and Oakland, that's piloting UBI programs. And one of the things they found is that they need to make sure that there is a financial incentive to collect data. Again, it's not a lot of money, it's like $25, $50, but without that, the return rates just crash, right? And then it's no longer statistically valid. So that's not something that we thought of, but we've now built that into our grants. So.
Can you just clarify what you just said about Stockton and Oakland? What program is that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have they've been really curious about is unconditional cash transfers. So unconditional cash transfers is the giving money away, no strings attached, right? There's lots of different flavors that would exist under the umbrella of Universal Basic Income or UBI. We're really interested in focusing on those. It gets a little tricky because you don't want to give funds to people who are on government assistance, and then by giving funds to people that are on government assistance who are getting SNAP or TANF or whatever, or the Section 8 benefits, we don't want to inadvertently raise their income so that they put those in jeopardy. So we're looking at, or at least we're thinking right now, focusing on those who are at 50% of the area median income or below, who are working, but might have their income spike throughout the month, right, based on tips, based on hours, based on sort of not having a set schedule, whatever, to even out sort of that, to even out that income. And we're looking at something significant. We're looking at $500 to $1,000 a month, right, really no strings attached. For a couple hundred families in Ward 8 to see how that goes. One of the things we're spending a lot of time thinking about, I'm sort of peeling back the curtain, but is how do you select those families is really critical. This needs to be a very open and transparent process. How come one neighbor gets sort of free money and somebody else sitting right next to them doesn't, right? So how is that lottery sort of done? And we're spending a lot of time sort of thinking through that selection process. And we don't have the funding yet, although we did get some planning funding from a foundation who's interested in helping us implement this. And if we do implement this, this will be, I think, the largest unconditional cash transfer program in the country. So we're really excited to see what this could look like as a demonstration. So happy offline to do a deeper dive. And there's some really good books. The Lowry's, Allison Lowry, I think, Give People Money is a great book. She's a journalist for The Atlantic. Chris Hughes, Fair Shot, he's the co-founder of Facebook, and he's really got into this, is a great book, and there's a couple other sort of reads. So, any other questions? Great, I'm gonna turn, oh yeah, and then I'll turn it back over to Natalie.
Just one quick
Yeah.
question. In your data collection, are you tracking real estate values on the Anacostia side?
Yep.
And what are you finding?
We are finding I'll answer that question in two different ways. Currently, there's a $450,000 delta between homes on one side of the river and the other, right? Separated by like 900 feet of water. I mean, it just, so people are looking at like that $1 million home row house in Capitol Hill, or I could get a $400,000 house in a historic neighborhood that's up and coming, sort of whatever that means. People are starting to see that, right? So property values have increased the year after year, anywhere from 12 to 25%. That sounds more alarming than it is because it started pretty low, but they are going up, right? And that's sort of critical. The thing that I wasn't sort of, I didn't mention and pepper through this, and we could have a whole other conversation about this, but I think that it's really critical to mention is that, and this is where some of the housing prices sort of comes into, so much of this is based on race. So much of this is based on race. And I know that that's not going to be a huge surprise to anybody in this room, but one of the things we spend a lot of time thinking about is we're never going to figure out where we're going unless we understand where we've been, right? For neighborhoods that have been historically redlined, for neighborhoods that have been historically and intentionally disconnected from the greatest wealth creation in America, based on their color of skin, is huge. And you look at the historic maps of Suitland Parkway that has been cleared out for a freeway, the historic Berry Farms, all of that that comes into that is critical. In the first version of our Equitable Development Plan, we used all the synonyms: economically challenged, the under-resourced, blah blah blah. In the second, the version of our Equitable Development Plan, we had a really good, robust conversation that we need to call this out. And what this is really about is, east of the river is 98% African American, right? And there's an 81 times difference between the average household wealth of white families and black families in DC. 81 times, right? So we need to make sure that we're calling out race. It's really critical, and increasingly it's been part of our community leadership empowerment workshop. It's about a lot of our programs, but that's critical, and I know that same issue exists here in LA. So, yeah.
I work in Community Land Trusts.
Oh, fabulous.
I know that I believe the 65-unit building that you purchased was through the Tenant Opportunity Purchase Act, that it was utilizing that tool to do the acquisition.
That was not, but we are working on several other TOPA projects in historic Anacostia. We're partnering with National Housing Trust on the property. We are not the developer. We do not want to be the developer, so we're partnering with nonprofit and for-profit developers, but where TOPA comes into play with a lot of the tenant advocacy work, because in DC, we have a law called the Tenant Opportunity Purchase Act that gives the tenants the first right of refusal to purchase a property if and when it goes for sale. And that sounds great, and it is, but to do that, you need a tenant association and you need 5% down payment, which is tough. So we're working to get in early to build those tenant associations and build that access to capital, so if and when that building is sold, they have a greater chance to exercise their TOPA rights, or if nothing else, make sure that they don't. People are going around right now and knocking on doors and saying, I'll give you a $500 check, just sign here and here and here, and that $500 sounds great until they realize they need to move somewhere else, right? And that $500 doesn't go very far. So a lot of what we're doing is making sure they know what their rights is and knows what their true value is, and that's critical.
So along with and I'm also really interested in TOPA, I'm specifically interested, have you built a policy agenda around housing and acquisitions? Is that articulated? How are you advancing the policy agenda?
if we were to do a third, and we probably are, an equitable development plan, we would spend a lot more time on policy. And we're spending a lot more time specifically focused on some of the small businesses that are getting just hammered right now with increased property taxes. So we're looking at displacement-free zones, property tax freezes, arts overlay districts, and working very closely with council and the administration to overlay those, because if ultimately that $57 million can go a lot farther if we're piloting some policy changes that then can impact the rest of the city. So, yeah, thank you, everybody.